Let these exalted words be thy love song in the tree of Baha, O thou most holy and resplendent leaf. God, besides whom is none other God, the Lord of this world and the next. Verily, we have elevated thee to the rank of one of the most distinguished among thy sex, and granted thee in my court a station such as none other woman hath surpassed. Thus have we preferred thee and raised thee above the rest, as a sign of grace from him who is the Lord of the throne on high and earth below. We have created thine eyes to behold the light of my countenance, thine ears to hearken unto the melody of my word, thy body to pay homage before my throne. Do thou render thanks unto God, thy Lord, the Lord of all the worlds. Baha'u'lláh. O my well-beloved, deeply spiritual sister, day and night thou livest in my memory. Whenever I remember thee, my heart swelleth with sadness, and my regret groweth more intense. Grieve not, for I am thy true, thy unfailing comforter. Let neither despondency nor despair becloud the serenity of thy life, or restrain thy freedom. These days shall pass away. We will, God willing, in the Abha kingdom and beneath the sheltering shadow of the blessed beauty, forget all these our earthly cares, and will find each of these base calumnies amply compensated by his expressions of praise and favor. From the beginning of time, sorrow and anxiety, regret and tribulation have always been the lot of every loyal servant of God. Ponder this in thine heart and consider how very true it is. Wherefore, set thine heart on the tender mercies of the ancient beauty, and be thou filled with abiding joy and intense gladness. Abdul Baha.
This is a great opportunity for me to talk about a woman who is so outstanding, so distinguished, that I feel absolutely worthless to have this opportunity to talk about her. But each one of us view her in our hearts and minds the way that we relate to her. She has been someone I have always looked up to and been hopeful that I will be able to do something to follow in her footsteps. I have prepared a PowerPoint to share, but before that, for those who may be unfamiliar with the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'lláh, the father of Baharieh Rouhani, is the prophet and founder of the Baha'i faith. He was born in Iran in 1817 and died in Akka in 1892. The reason he passed away in Akka, which was in Palestine then, is because he was exiled from his homeland. And in 1850, he had to leave Iran. He never returned, and he passed away in Akka in 1892, as I said. His teachings revolve around the principles of equity, unity, international peace, and many other principles which are timely for today. And you can find Baha'is throughout the world. They are in millions. With that, I like to start the PowerPoint and share with you two images of Baharieh Rouhani. This is Baharieh Rouhani 3 years after Baha'u'lláh had passed away. And then I have chosen another one, which is later in life. That says 1919. It was taken about 2 years before Abdul Baha's ascension. So you can see now the image of the woman on whom we are focusing today. Baha'u'lláh and his wife, Asi Khánum, had several children. Altogether, there were 6 boys and 1 girl. Some of the male children passed away in infancy. 2 of them survived. But the only one daughter is the one we are talking about today. She was born Fatemeh, and it was in 1846 when she was born. Her father later gave her the feminine form of his own title. She called her Bahíyyih or Bahíyyih. The friends in Iran generally know her as Baharieh Khanum. Her ring stone, which was also used as a seal, says Bahíyyih. But when Shoghi Effendi introduced her to the Bahá'í world after she passed away, he used Bahíyyih because it's easier to pronounce, and also it's a name familiar with to many people. But for some reason, because I was raised in Iran, I have been using Bahíyyih, and you will see throughout this presentation, I will use Bahíyyih, but it's the same as Bahíyyih. The early years of Baharieh Khanum coincided with the feverish activities of Baha'u'lláh, who was promoting the cause of the Báb. The Báb is the forerunner of Baha'u'lláh. He declared his mission in 1844, and his main purpose was to prepare the people for the coming of Baha'u'lláh, who is the promise of all ages. As a result of those activities, Baha'u'lláh was severely persecuted, arrested, even imprisoned. After 4 months in the worst prison in Tehran, called Siyahchah, the government of Iran, the Shah, agreed that he could be released from prison on condition that he leave Iran for good. At that time, Baharieh Khanum was only 6 years old. So at that age, she witnessed how her father was in prison, how the family suffered because their house was plundered and everything was taken away. Baharieh Khanum's long distinguished life was dedicated to serving the cause of Baha'u'lláh, to assisting her saintly mother, Asi Khánum, to supporting her beloved brother, Abdul Baha, who was the successor of Baha'u'lláh and the exemplar of his teachings and the interpreter of his writings. He also stood firmly by the side of Shoghi Effendi, the grandson of Abdul Baha, who was appointed in Abdul Baha's will and testament as the guardian of the cause of God. Baharieh Khanum is entitled as the greatest holy leaf. This is a title that Baha'u'lláh first gave to her mother, Asi Khánum. After Asi Khánum passed away, Baha'u'lláh gave the same title to Baharieh Khanum. Shoghi Effendi, in order to clarify the matter, in order to avoid confusion, used the title of the most exalted leaf for Asi Khánum and the greatest holy leaf for Baharieh Khanum. To become familiar with the uniqueness of Baharieh Khanum's station, we turn to Baha'u'llah's testimony for her. Baha'u'lláh says, this is my testimony for her who had heard my voice and drawn nigh unto me. Verily, she is a leaf that had sprung from this pre-existent root. She had revealed herself in my name and tasted of the sweet savors of my holy, my wondrous pleasure. You see here the line that I have highlighted. She had revealed herself in my name, he says. His name is Baha'u'lláh. And I think it's on the basis of this tablet that we find the documentation about her being called Bahíyyih by her father. Baha'u'lláh also says, how high is the testimony of the Sadratul Muntaha for its leaf? How exalted the witness of the tree of life and to its fruit. Sadratul Muntaha, the literal translation of the word, is the tree beyond which there is no passing. This is a term used for the manifestations of God, and particularly for Baha'u'lláh. Baha'u'lláh has named Baharieh Khánum as the most distinguished heroine of the Baha'i dispensation. The tablet was recited at the beginning of the program, so I will not repeat it. I will just put it on the screen so that you will see it's the same. Shoghi Effendi testifies that Baharieh Khánum, from her earliest years until the close of her life, did personify the attributes of her father, that she was the fruit of his tree, the lamp of his love, the symbol of his serenity and of his meekness, the pathway of his guidance, the channel of his blessings, the sweet scent of his robe, the refuge of his loved ones and his handmaidens, the mantle of his generosity and grace. I have not seen anyone else being praised by anyone else, I mean, among Baha'u'llah's female followers and relatives so highly as Shoghi Effendi has done it for Baharieh Khánum. Another lofty statement of Shoghi Effendi about Baharieh Khánum is that he says she influenced some of the chief events of Baha'i history. In one of his tributes, he says, the unique part Baharieh Khánum played through the tumultuous stage of Baha'i history. He highlights that, and he emphasizes the share she has had in influencing the course of some of the chief events in the annals of the faith. He refers to the sufferings she bore, the sacrifices she made, the rare gifts of unfailing sympathy she so strikingly displayed. Then he says something to me is extraordinary because I think it contains a warning to future historians of the faith. He says, these and many others stand so inextricably interwoven with the fabric of the cause itself that no future historian of the faith of Baha'u'lláh can afford to ignore or minimize. Shoghi Effendi, well familiar with how women's contribution to religious faiths had been minimized and ignored, here he is alerting the future historians of the faith not to do it with the greatest holy leaf. I repeat what he said again. These and many others stand so inextricably interwoven with the fabric of the cause itself that no future historian of the faith of Baha'u'lláh can afford to ignore or minimize. You see, he highlighted all the attributes of Baharieh Khánum, and then he said this that I quoted. I was looking for a description of the greatest holy leaf from the viewpoint of a pilgrim or someone outside the family. And I found something by Ella Cooper, very moving and she explains the actual physical resemblance that Baharieh Khánum had to Abdul Baha. She says, next to meeting the beloved master himself was the privilege of meeting his glorious sister, Baharieh Khánum, known as the greatest holy leaf. Tall, slender, and of noble bearing. Her beautiful face was the feminine counterpart of Abdul Baha's. The line of suffering and privation softened by the patient sweetness of the mouth. The dominating brow, bespeaking intellect and will, lighted by the wonderful understanding eyes. In form like those of Abdul Baha, but deep blue rather than hazel. Watching their expressive changes, as one moment they darkened with sympathy or pain, the next moment sparkled with laughter and humor, only served to deepen the impression of her irresistible spiritual attraction. Let me go back and see and start chronologically from the early years of Baharieh Khánum's life. In late 1852, 3 Bábí youth whose families had suffered tremendously in the hand of the prejudiced population, who held the Shah responsible for what was happening to the members of their families, they made an unsuccessful attempt on the life of the Shah. The Shah survived, but the event was used as a pretext to kill many prominent Bábís, and the same event was used to arrest Baha'u'lláh and imprison him. At that moment, when Baha'u'llah's house had been plundered and his family, his wife, and little children, at that time, 3 of them, were homeless, Baharieh Khánum was 6 years old and suffered to the point that she had at that early stage of life understand what could be the cause of so much cruelty that her family had suffered. The sufferings that Shoghi Effendi explains here. He says her parents had so suddenly lost their possessions, that within the space of a single day, from being the privileged member of one of the wealthiest families of Tehran, she had sunk to the state of a sufferer, the state of a sufferer from unconcealed poverty. So this was the lot of a 6-year-old girl who was being persecuted because of her father, who was promoting a faith that would bring peace and unity to the world. After 4 months in the Siyah-Chal, Baha'u'lláh was freed, as I said before, on condition that he leave Iran, never to return. So in January 1853, Baha'u'lláh and his family left for Iraq, then a part of the Ottoman Empire. Baharieh Khanum says, it was bitterly cold, and the route lay over mountains. My father was very ill. The chains had left his neck gaunt, raw, and much swollen. My mother, who was pregnant, was unaccustomed to hardships and was worried and harassed over our recent travel and the uncertainty of our fate. We were all insufficiently clothed and suffered keenly from exposure. These are the memories of a 6-year-old girl when she was interviewed later in life. That's how she explained it. About life in Baghdad, Baharieh Khanum says, we struggled through this period as bravely as we could until after a time, occasional remittances came to us from Tehran. The proceeds of personal effects, jewels, cloth of gold, and other valuable articles, which were a part of my mother's dowry, she said, which had been left there to be sold. The money ameliorated our condition to a considerable extent. I have been asked several times how Baha'u'lláh and his family survived in Baghdad. And this tells us how they maintained themselves. It was through the sale of the dowry of Asya Khánum that they managed to survive, because Baha'u'lláh had lost his house and everything he had. So this was one of the ways that they managed to survive. Then about a year or two after arrival in Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh left all of a sudden for an unknown destination. And there was a huge problem that Baha'u'lláh was facing when he and his family arrived in Iraq, in the hand of his half-brother, who had on his own left Iran and joined Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad. His name was Mirza Yahya Azad. He was a very ambitious man, and at the same time, very fearful that if he remained in Iran, he would be in danger. So in order to save himself, he left in the guise of a dervish and went to Baghdad and lived in Baha'u'llah's home as an uninvited guest. Baharieh Khanum, as a little girl, suffered a lot after Baha'u'lláh left and went to Kurdistan. His sojourn in Kurdistan lasted for about 2 years. And Baharieh Khanum has left also his impression of what was happening then. He says, we led a very difficult life at this time, as well as a lonely one. He, referring to Mirza Yahya, would not even allow us to go to the hammam to take our baths. Nobody was permitted to come to the house to help us. And the work, therefore, was very hard. One of Baharieh Khanum's daily arduous tasks was to draw water from a deep well for domestic use. I remember those wells and how people had to get water from a deep water well for domestic use. Baharieh Khanum says, for hours every day, I had to stand drawing water from a deep well in the house. The ropes were hard and rough, and the bucket was heavy. My dear mother used to help, but she was not very strong, and my arms were rather weak. Our guest never helped. The guest is Mirza Yahya Azal, who lived there. It prevented Baharieh Khanum to go out of the house. She was only 8 years old. And she suffered tremendously during that time. When Baha'u'lláh returned to Baghdad from Sulaymaniyeh in Kurdistan, Baharieh Khanum was, as I said, about 8, 9 years old. According to Islamic tradition practiced at the time, girls were considered mature at 9. Baharieh Khanum's time was so fully occupied with carrying out various tasks that helping her parents that she had no time for other activities, such as studying. When Lady Bloomfield interviewed her in Haifa decades later about the time Baha'u'lláh returned to Baghdad, she said, at last, as my mother, my brother, and I sat in a breathless state of expectancy, we heard a step. It was a dervish. Through the disguise, we saw the light of our beloved one's presence. Our joy cannot be described as we clung to him. I can see now my beloved mother, calm and gentle, and my brother holding his father's hand fast, as though never again could he let him go out of his sight. The lovely boy almost enfolded in the uncouth garment of the dervish disguise. I could never forget this scene, so touching and so happy. Then the question about receiving lessons in childhood came up. Baharieh Khanum responded, my mother sometimes gave lessons to my brother Abbas. At other times, Mirza Musa would teach him. Mirza Musa was Baha'u'llah's brother. And on some occasions, he would be taught by his father. Lady Bloomfield probed, and your lessons? Baharieh Khanum answered, but I never had any time for study. After about 10 years in Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh was invited to Istanbul, then the capital of the Ottoman Empire. He, his family, and his companions left Baghdad on May 3rd, 1863. Before Baha'u'lláh left Baghdad, he spent 12 days in a garden outside Baghdad, where he actually declared to those who were with him that he was the promised one, of the one promised by the Báb. After 4 months in Istanbul, it became clear that the exiles were to go to Adrianople. It's Baha'u'lláh referred to Adrianople as the remote prison because they were exiles and they were confined, so they were prisoners. The reason may be because it's the furthermost city in Turkey from Iran and the closest to the European continent. Shokh Effendi says, pursuant to the peremptory orders issued for the immediate departure of the already twice banished exiles, Baha'u'lláh, his family, and his companions, some riding in wagons, others mounted on packed animals, with their belongings piled in carts, drawn by oxen, set out, accompanied by Turkish officers, on a cold December morning, amidst the weeping of the friends they were leaving behind, on their 12-day journey across a bleak and wind-swept country to a city characterized by Baha'u'lláh as the place which none entered except such as have rebelled against authority of the sovereign. See, this was the city that was there for the people who had arisen against the government. And yet, under pressure from the religious people in Iran, they exiled Baha'u'lláh and his family to that city. The duration of Baha'u'lláh and his family's stay in Adrianople was nearly 5 years. The period was marked by a number of conspicuous developments. The one that affected Baha'u'llah's family the most was the open rebellion of Mirza Yahya, who, fearing what might befall him, as I said before, left Iran on his own accord in the guise of a dervish, joined Baha'u'lláh and his family in Baghdad as an uninvited guest. To ensure his own safety and comfort, he made everyone else's life unpleasant and difficult, especially during the 2 years Baha'u'lláh was in Kurdistan. When Baha'u'lláh and his companions were exiled to Adrianople, Mirza Yahya followed them there, intensified his subversive activities against Baha'u'lláh. When his efforts to discredit Baha'u'lláh failed to attract the attention he craved, he decided to get rid of him. He invited Baha'u'lláh to his home, offered him tea in a cup smeared with poison. The poison made Baha'u'lláh very ill. The illness lasted for a month. He survived, but the effect of the poison was present to the end of his life. Mirza Yahya then conspired to have Baha'u'lláh assassinated. The plot exposed Mirza Yahya's intentions. Baha'u'lláh severed all ties with Mirza Yahya, who started a campaign of disinformation and misinformation against Baha'u'lláh and his faithful followers. Baha'u'lláh has referred to the episode as the most great convulsion. During that period, Baharieh Khánum, then in the prime of her youth, stood firmly against the forces of negation, did her best to help others to weather the storm. Shoghi Effendi says, in the land of mystery, which is another title for Adrianople, her lovely form, he is referring to the greatest holy week. In the land of mystery, her lovely form was worn away to a breath, to a shadow, and during the most great convulsion, which in the year of stress made every heart to quake, she stood as a soaring pillar, immovable and fixed, and from the blasts of desolation that rose and blew, that leaf of the eternal low tree did not wither. Rather did she redouble her efforts, urging herself on the more, to servitude and sacrifice, in captivating hearts and winning over souls, in destroying doubts and misgivings, she led the field. With the waters of her countless mercies, she brought thorny hearts to a blossoming of love from the all-glorious. And with the influence of her pure loving kindness, transformed the implacable, the unyielding into impassioned lovers of the celestial beauty's peerless cause. Shoghi Effendi then describes it was in this period of extreme anxiety, which the rigors of a winter of exceptional severity, coupled with the privations entailed by unhealthy housing accommodation and dire financial distress, undermined once for all her health and sapped the vitality which she had hitherto so thoroughly enjoyed. The stress and storm of that period made an abiding impression upon her mind, and she retained till the time of her death on her beauteous and angelic face evidences of its intense hardship. So here we see how Baharieh Khánum, during the time in Adrianople, suffered an illness that stayed with her to the end of her life. That is the quote that I just finished reading. And the next one is concerning the voyage from Haifa to Akka, which we'll get to it. So when, after 5 years in Adrianople, the schemes of Mirza Yahya and the pressure from the ulama of Iran forced the government of Turkey to exile Baha'u'lláh and his family and his followers to a place known for its severity and hardships. And the hope was that Baha'u'lláh will suffer life imprisonment there, and there would be no hope of any further development. So the departure from Adrianople, everybody was forced to leave Adrianople, and they left Adrianople for the next and final place of exile, which was Akka. They left Adrianople for Akka on 12 August 1868. The Austrian Lloyd steamer carrying the exiles reached Haifa on 31 August 1868. Baha'u'lláh, his family, and all but 4 of his followers, as well as a number of Azalis. Azalis are the followers of Mirza Yahya as well. Disembarked. After a few hours, they were put in a sailing boat and sent to Akka. Mirza Yahya, his supporters, and 4 of Baha'u'llah's followers were sent to Famagusta, Cyprus. Concerning the voyage from Haifa to Akka, Baharieh Rouhani says, there being no wind and no shelter from the burning rays of the sun, we spent 8 hours of positive misery, and at last we had reached Akka, the end of our journey. There was a detachment of soldiers on shore, drawn up in 2 lines. Between these lines, the prisoners walked to the barracks. What a welcome. She also speaks of the reaction of the population of Akka. She said all the townspeople had assembled to see the arrival of the prisoners. Having been told that we were infidels, criminals, and sowers of sedition, the attitude of the crowd was threatening. Their yelling of curses and execration filled us with fresh misery. We were terrified of the unknown. We knew not what the fate of our party, the friends, and ourselves would be. So say, we were taken to the old fortress of Akka, where we were crowded together. There was no air. A small quantity of very bad, coarse bread was provided. We were unable to get fresh water to drink. Our sufferings were not diminished. Then an epidemic of typhoid broke out. Nearly all became ill. Shoghi Effendi adds, all fell sick except 2 shortly after their arrival. Malaria, dysentery, combined with the sultry heat, added to their misery. 3 succumbed among them. 3 succumbed, among them 2 brothers who died the same night, locked, as testified by Baha'u'lláh, in each other's arms. They succumbed, died the same night, locked in each other's arms. During the 2 years that Baha'u'lláh and his family were imprisoned in the army barracks in Akka, the most tragic accident or incident happened, and that is the fall from the roof through an unguarded skylight of Mirza Mehdi, the younger brother of Baharieh Khanum, which caused his death 22 hours later. The prisoner's appalling living conditions had continued for nearly 2 years, with no relief in sight. Then a devastating tragedy struck. Baharieh Khanum's beloved brother, whom she as a little girl had held in her tiny arms and protected against harm when Baha'u'lláh was in the Siyah-Chal of Tehran. A brother who was now a lovely young man, serving Baha'u'lláh as his amanuensis and helping the family and exile in whatever way he could, fell through an unguarded skylight in the roof of the barracks. Shoghi Effendi says his dying supplication to a grieving father was that his life might be accepted as a ransom for those who were prevented from attaining the presence of their beloved, Baha'u'lláh. Speaking of his son's highly significant sacrifice, Baha'u'lláh says, I have, O my Lord, offered up that which thou hast given me, that thy servants may be quickened and all that dwell on earth be united. Four months after the passing of Mirza Mehdi, the exiles were allowed to leave the barracks. The war between Russia and Turkey necessitated vacating the space occupied by over 70 exiles to make room for soldiers in the barracks. The next episode is life inside the prison city. Baharieh Khanum says how we rejoiced in our liberty, despite the fact that we had paid such a high price for it. And that was the sacrifice of Mirza Mehdi. How we rejoiced in our liberty, restricted though it was. Only 3 times had we been permitted to go out for even an hour from the prison barracks during the whole of that first 2 years. How tired we were of those 2 little rooms. Speaking of life inside the prison city, Shoghi Effendi says, not until she, that is Baharieh Khanum, had been confined in the company of Baha'u'lláh within the walls of the prison city of Akka, did she display in the plenitude of her power and in the full abundance of her love for him those gifts that singled her out next to Abdul Baha among the members of the Holy Family as the brightest embodiment of that love which is born of God and of that human sympathy which few mortals are capable of evincing. The happy events that happened in the city after the prisoners had been released from the barracks was the marriage of Abdul Baha. It was a most joyous occasion, especially for Baharieh Khanum and her mother. It took place on March 8, 1873 in a room that connects the house of Udi Kamar with the house of Abud. The pilgrims who go to the Holy Land, they see the house of Abud and are usually taken to this room where Abdul Baha's marriage took place. In the person of Munira Khánum, the greatest holy leaf found a loving sister. They lived in the same dwelling place, whether in Akka or Haifa, for 60 years. After Baha'u'lláh moved to the mansion of Mazra'eh, a short distance to the north of the present city, Abdul Baha and his family, together with his mother and his sister, Baharieh Rouhani, continued to live in the house of Abdul in Akka. Some years after Abdul Baha's marriage, Asiya Khánum, the mother of Baharieh Rouhani and Abdul Baha, who had suffered so much after Baha'u'lláh was imprisoned in Tehran, at the end of her life, she had gone through so many ups and downs, little up, all down actually. Her health suffered irreparably almost after her son Mirza Mehdi died after falling from the roof of the barracks. She passed away in Akka in the house of Abdul. Baha'u'lláh was at her bedside when she passed away. However, she had lived long enough to witness the joy of the birth of her grandchildren. These are the children of Abdul Baha and Munira Khánum, some of whom died in infancy, but 4 survived the healthy environment of Akka. Her health impaired, as I said, by the tragic death of her son Mirza Mehdi, deteriorated steadily until her long-suffering spirit winged its flight to the celestial realm. She passed away in 1886. Overcoming the agony of the passing of a mother, Baharieh Rouhani had tried so desperately to help during her numerous ordeals was no doubt most difficult, that she had Baha'u'lláh as her supreme comforter. 6 years after Asiya Khánum's passing, Baharieh Rouhani suffered the greatest ordeal of her life when Baha'u'llah's ascension took place in May 1892. She was so affected by the intensity of her grief that Abdul Baha was worried about her health condition. To a friend in Egypt, he wrote, he says, my sister, for a considerable period, that is from the day of Baha'u'llah's ascension, had grown so thin and feeble and was in such a weakened condition from the anguish of her mourning that she was close to break down. One of the reasons for her grief was what the faithless members of the family were doing to Abdul Baha. Anyway, Abdul Baha found it necessary to provide Baharieh Rouhani with a change of air. He knew a change of scenery and air would help her. So he arranged for her to go to Egypt, accompanied by his eldest daughter, Baharieh Rouhani. Excuse me for my voice, it's the height of allergy season and it affects my voice. In a tablet to his daughter, Abdul Baha wrote, "O Zia, it's incumbent upon thee throughout the journey to be a close, a constant and cheerful companion to my honored and distinguished sister, unceasingly, with the utmost vigor and devotion, exert thyself by day and night to gladden her blessed heart. For all her days, she was denied a moment of tranquility. She was astir and restless every hour of her life. Mothright, she settled in adoration round the undying flame of the divine candle, her spirit ablaze and her heart consumed by the fire of his love." After Baha'u'llah's ascension, as it was with Mirza Yahya, Baha'u'llah's half-brother, who was willing to do the unthinkable to satisfy his intense craving for leadership, so did Abdul Baha's half-brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali. Although he did not contest Baha'u'llah's will written throughout in his hand and bearing his seal, Mirza Muhammad Ali used every means at his disposal to undermine Abdul Baha's station and authority. Referring to how Baharieh Khanum reacted to the situation, Shoghi Effendi says, "With the passing of Baha'u'llah and the fierce onslaught of the forces of disruption that followed in its wake, the greatest Holy League, now in the heyday of her life, rose to the height of her great opportunity and acquitted herself worthily of her task. But for her sleepless vigilance, her tact, her courtesy, her extreme patience, and heroic fortitude, grave complications might have ensued, and the load of Abdul Baha's anxious care would have been considerably increased." Shoghi Effendi testifies that Baharieh Khanum was the partner in sorrow and tribulation of Abdul Baha. Describing the nature of the services Baharieh Khanum rendered after Abdul Baha's release from confinement, Shoghi Effendi says, "Forgetful of her own self, disdaining rest and comfort, and undeterred by the obstacles that still stood in her path, she acted as the honored hostess to a steadily increasing number of pilgrims who thronged Abdul Baha's residence from both the east and the west, continued to display those same attributes that had won her in the preceding phases of her career so great a measure of admiration and love." When Abdul Baha decided to go to the West for his epoch-making trip, he had the greatest Holy League, Baharieh Khanum, to rely on while he was away. She was the only one that Abdul Baha could trust to be absolutely selfless and only act for the sake of the interests of the faith of God. So at the point of departure from the Holy Land, she revealed a tablet in honor of Baharieh Khánum. It reads, "O thou my sister, my dear sister, divine wisdom hath decreed this temporary separation, but I long more and more to be with thee again. Patience is called for, and long suffering, and trust in God, and the secret and the seeking of his favor." This is the key sentence. Since thou art there, my mind is completely at rest. Shoghi Effendi says, and when the ban on Abdul Baha's confinement was lifted, he, with unhesitating confidence, invested his trusted and honored sister with the responsibility of attending to the multitudinous details arising out of his protracted absence from the Holy Land. He also says at the time of his, that's Abdul Baha's absence in the Western world, she was his competent deputy, his representative and vicegerent, with none to equal her. But really, after Abdul Baha, Baharieh Rouhani was next in rank. And what Abdul Baha did with this period of absence served as a foundation for what Baharieh Khánum did when Abdul Baha passed away, and Shoghi Effendi, whom he had appointed as the guardian of the cause of God in his will and testament, was away studying. He set the stage for her to take over for a month and help the Baha'is throughout the world to remain calm and collected until Shoghi Effendi reached Iceland. Abdul Baha's trip lasted for 3 years. When he returned home, he stayed in Egypt for some time. At that time, he invited Baharieh Khánum to join him in Egypt and asked her to also bring Shoghi Effendi, his eldest grandson. He was then about 16 years old. Being reunited with Abdul Baha was Baharieh Khánum's greatest reward. Now, Abdul Baha had been back in the Holy Land for about a year when World War I broke out. During that war, every aspect of life was disrupted in the Holy Land, especially. Lots of restrictions were imposed on travel, communication, transportation, and the like. Pilgrimage stopped. Baharieh Khánum was then about 67 years old. Shoghi Effendi describes her reaction when she witnessed the intensity of suffering the poor of Haifa experienced. So these are the services she rendered during World War I. Shoghi Effendi says the outbreak of the Great War gave her yet another opportunity to reveal the true worth of her character and to release the latent energy of her heart. The residence of Abdul Baha in Haifa was besieged all throughout that very conflict by a concourse of famished men, women, and children, whom the maladministration, the cruelty and neglect of the officials of the Ottoman government had driven to seek an alleviation to their woes. From the hand of the greatest Holy League and out of the abundance of her heart, these hapless victims of a contemptible tyranny received day after day unforgettable evidence of a love they had learned to envy and admire. Her words of cheer and comfort, the food, the money, the clothing she freely dispensed, the remedies which, by a process of her own, she herself prepared and diligently applied, all these had their share in comforting the disconsolate, in restoring sight to the blind, in sheltering the orphan, in healing the sick, and in succoring the homeless and the wanderer. About 3 years after the end of the war, Abdul Baha passed away. Abdul Baha passed away on 28 November 1921. At that time, Shoghi Effendi, whom he had appointed in his will and testament as the guardian of the cause of God, was studying in England. Nobody knew that Abdul Baha had appointed Shoghi Effendi as the guardian of the cause of God. Apparently, even Shoghi Effendi didn't know that he had been appointed as such. The only person in whom Abdul Baha had confided this highly kept secret was the greatest Holy League. Shoghi Effendi describes the crucial role Baharieh Khanum played during that period. He says the ascension of Abdul Baha, so tragic in its suddenness, was to her a terrible blow from the effects of which she never completely recovered. To her, he whom she called Agha had been a refuge in times of adversity. On him, she had been let place her sole reliance. In him, she had found ample compensation for the bereavement she had suffered, the desertions she had witnessed, the ingratitude she had been shown by friends and kindred. No one could ever dream that a woman of her age, so frail in body, so sensitive of heart, so loaded with the care of 80 years of incessant tribulation, would so long survive so shattering a blow. And yet, history, no less than the annals of our immortal faith, shall report for her a share in the advancement and consolidation of the worldwide community, which the hand of Abdul Baha had helped to fashion, which no one among the remnants of his family can rival. When Abdul Baha left this earthly realm on November 28, 1921, Baharieh Khanum, as I said, was the only believer in whom Abdul Baha had confided that in his will and testament, he had named his eldest grandson, Shohei Effendi, the guardian of the cause of God. After Abdul Baha passed away, Baharieh Khanum's main task was to keep the believers united and protected from the effect of a vast campaign of misinformation launched by the faithless members of the family who wanted to install Mirza Muhammad Ali as Abdul Baha's successor. On 14 December 1921, Baharieh Khanum warned the Baha'is of the United States against the intrigues of the covenant breakers who were active in that country. Covenant breakers is a term used for those who went against the covenant Baha'u'lláh had made about his successor, Abdul Baha. The cable that Baharieh Khanum sent to the friends in the United States reads, "Now is period of great test. The friends should be firm and united in defending the cause. Naqizin, that's the covenant breakers, starting activities through press, other channels all over the world. Select committee of wise, cool heads to handle press propaganda in America." The reason some of the words are missing is because it was sent as a cable. On December 21, 1921, the Greatest Holy League assured the Persian and American believers that Abdul Baha had left full instructions in his will and testament. So now the believers knew that Abdul Baha had his will and testament, and in it he had left full instructions about the future of the faith. Then on the afternoon of 29 December 1921, with a broken heart and frail arm, Baharieh Khanum received Shohei Effendi in the embrace of her boundless love, bowing before his authority and urging all to do likewise. At that time, Shohei Effendi was 24 years old and Baharieh Khanum 75. Mirza Muhammad Ali, Abdul Baha's half-brother, continued his scheme during the time of Shohei Effendi because he claimed that he was the rightful successor of Abdul Baha. However, during Abdul Baha's life, he had forfeited that right and had been thrown out of the faith because of his disloyalty to the covenant of Baha'u'lláh. The history of what went on during the early years of Shohei Effendi's ministry is very long, and I'm not going to be able to cover it here. The only thing I can share with you is that they made life so difficult, and Shohei Effendi found it necessary to go away for a while to recuperate and regain his health. During that time, he appointed a committee under the headship of the of Baharieh Khánum to look after the affairs of the community. In those early times, Mirza Muhammad Ali and his accomplices thought if they could have the custodianship of the shrine of Baha'u'lláh, that would guarantee their right of leadership. So by force, they took the key to the shrine of Baha'u'lláh from the Baha'i custodian that had been appointed during the time of Abdul Baha. They were hoping that the case will be referred to the Islamic court and it would issue its decree in favor of Mirza Muhammad Ali. However, the Islamic court refused because they said the Baha'i faith is very different from Islam. And as a result, the authorities had to take over the case. And in those days, Palestine was under, I think, the protectorship of UK, of the British Isles. After some investigation, they returned the key to the rightful custodian. The next and the last episode is Baharieh Khanum's services during Shoaib Efendi's ministry, which I touched upon, especially with regard to the times that he was away. And she said, as the head of the committee he had appointed. To know the magnitude of the services Baharieh Khanum rendered during the early years of Shoaib Efendi's ministry, one should read the tributes he penned in her honor. In one of them, he says, "How can my lonely pen repay the great debt of gratitude and love that I owe her, whom I regarded as my chief sustainer, my most affectionate comforter, the joy and inspiration of my life." Baharieh Khanum passed away in the early morning hours of July 15, 1932. Shoaib Efendi was away when she passed away. She sent a table to announce her passing. Yet his holy lips, immortal spirit, winged its flag, raised beyond. Countless lovers her saintly life in east and west, seized with pangs of anguish, plunged in unutterable sorrow. Humanity shall ere long recognize irreparable loss. Our beloved faith, well nigh crushed by devastating blow of Abdul Baha's unexpected ascension, now laments passing last remnant of Baha'u'lláh, its most exalted member. Holy Family cruelly divested its most precious, most great adorning. I, for my part, bewail sudden removal, my sole earthly sustainer, the joy and solace of my life. Her sacred remains will repose in the vicinity of Holy Shrine. So grievous a bereavement necessitates suspension for 9 months throughout the whole world, every manner religious festivity. Inform local assemblies and groups, hold befitting manner memorial gatherings, extol her life, so laden with sacred experiences, so proud, imperishable memory. at right, holding additional commemoration, service of strictly devotional character in auditorium of Masjid al-Aqsa. Even though Shoq Effendi was away when Baharieh Khanum passed away, he had left instructions as to where she should be buried. And that was a spot on Mount Carmel that he had chosen for the purpose. As you can see on this part of Mount Carmel, which is close to the shrine of the Báb, to the right of the slide, where I am sitting, there was nothing else there except for a building that you see to the left, and this was built to serve as a school for years. And since there was ample land available, and also because of the significance of this part of the mountain, Shoq Effendi had chosen it for the resting place of the greatest holy leaf. After it had been developed, you can see this is the monument, the cypress trees and the grass. The plan of Shoq Effendi was elaborate. He wanted to bring the remains of Baharieh Khanum's mother and brother, that's Arsieh Khanum and Mirza Mehdi. He wanted to transfer the remains to Mount Carmel and have them buried in the neighborhood of the resting place of the greatest holy leaf. She had always expressed a wish to be buried next to her mother. And Shoq Effendi made it come true by bringing the remains of Arsieh Khanum and Mirza Mehdi to Haifa. And when he finished the transfer of the remains of Arsieh Khanum and Mirza Mehdi, he sent a cable which says, "Blessed remains, purest branch and master's mother, safely transferred, hallowed precincts, shrine, Mount Carmel. Cherished wish, greatest holy leaf, fulfilled. Sister, brother, mother, wife of Abdul Baha, reunited one spot. Design, constitute, focal center, Baha'i administrative institutions at Faith World Centre. Share joyful news, entire body American believers." These are the twin monuments of Arsieh Khanum and the purest branch, Mirza Mehdi. And this is the resting place of Munir Khanum, which, as you can see, is much smaller, has no dome, has less columns. And when he said these gardens, monument gardens, will be the focal center of the future international institutions of the faith, that's what he meant. He created the arc around the resting place of the greatest holy leaf, which is here. The twin monuments of Arsieh Khanum of Mirza Mehdi are here. Below them here is the resting place of Munir Khanum. And so it has become the focal center of these institutions, with the Universal House of Justice in the center top of the arc that he created around those resting places. So Baharieh Khanum, not only in person, he is this highly elevated, unique personality, but also his resting place has profound significance. And this is all based on the contents of the kernel of the tablet of kernel that Shoghi Effendi created this area. I will end here. I'm sorry if I have gone beyond the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting to learn about Baharieh Khanum's life. I never see anyone going in depth about it as you did. So thank you so much. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. We will end off with a video. Next week, our speaker will be Dr. Stephen Phelps, and his topic will be the search for meaning and purpose in the universe. And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern Time, so please invite your friends and family. If you'd like to learn more about the Baha'i Faith or to be on the weekly mailing list for these events, please fill out the contact form that we put in the chat and that we also have in the description box of our YouTube videos. We'll end today with another song about Baharieh Khanum.
Bahíyyih, Bahíyyih, so lovely is your name. Bahíyyih, Bahíyyih, we've all been touched by your flame. Because of you, the Latin world knows Bahā'u'lláh, the first to gather night and cry Allahu Akbar. Your sacrifice and tears have cleansed your people's fears. Bahíyyih, Bahā'u'llah's here.
Bahíyyih, Bahíyyih, so lovely is your name. Bahíyyih, Bahíyyih, we've all been touched by your flame. Because of you, the Latin world knows Baha'u'lláh, the first to gather night and cry Allahu Akbar. Your sacrifice and tears have cleansed your people's fears. Bahíyyih, Baha'u'llah's here.
Ooh, when I think of your embrace, every smile on every face, my soul smiles.
Smile, smile.
Bahíyyih, Bahíyyih, so lovely is your name.
Bahíyyih, 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 Bahíyyih. My soul smile.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye, and we'll all see you next Saturday.